Welcome to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics, the podcast that delves into the power of traditional cattle genetics and the ranchers bringing them back. We're returning to the tried and true practices that prioritize what truly works on the ranch. Each episode, we'll talk to ranchers who are rediscovering the methods that built strong, resilient, efficient, and fertile herds in the 1960s and 70s. These breeders are blending the best of the past with practical solutions for today's ranching world. Whether you're passionate about the future of ranching or curious about heritage genetics, this podcast is for you. Presented by Boss Sires. Tune in as we reconnect with the roots of the herd. Here's your host, Patrick Powers.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sustainable Stock. I'm your host, Patrick Powers. Today's guest is Jesse Colón, born in California, now ranching in Zacatecas, Mexico. His path hasn't been typical. From missionary work to managing cattle in tough environments, Jesse's building something from the ground up with zero shortcuts and a whole lot of grit. He's not following trends, he's following conviction. And the result is a regenerative operation that speaks for itself. Let's get into it. Jesse, are you with us?
I'm with you, Patrick.
Hey, Bubba, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's a beautiful day out here in Zacatecas, Mexico, and
thank you for saying that the correct way.
Oh, no problem. I got you.
For the listeners, I've already said that wrong 3 times.
Yeah, but it's okay. Practice makes perfect.
That's exactly right.
And then once you visit, then you really get it down with the accent and everything.
Bingo. Well, Bubba, I say we dive right into it. I typically like to give the guests an opportunity just to get their name and story out there. So please introduce yourself and take a good long minute to do it.
Oh, I appreciate it. Well, like you said in the intro, California, born and raised, but I got to say just a little bit outside Los Angeles. So California is big, and there's certainly a lot of part where there's cattle and there's agriculture, but that's not the area I grew up in. My dad migrated from Mexico at the age of 19. So he was in California working in the city, but loved horses and cattle because that's where he grew up here in Zacatecas. And so we always had a little, friend with a backyard and a few horses that we kept, horses part of our life. But cattle wasn't until I started getting down here and visiting more often that I got exposure to that. And it was just exposure, on those 2-week trips down here, growing up. But when I came out here 8 years ago now, 2016, and those frequent visits to the ranch when Dad would call from California and say, "Well, take salt to the ranch hand and go take this and go take that," and I started going a lot more often, interacting with cattle was a whole new game for me, different than quarter horses and definitely different than what I would encounter cats and dogs in California.
Absolutely.
So it started with those short visits. My dad would send me out there to the ranch. I'm living in the city of Jerez in Zacatecas, central Mexico, about 12 hours south of the border. And so living in the city here in Jerez is about 25 minutes away from the ranch. So I'd have to take those trips out. In the beginning, it was, just inconvenient. It was, I didn't want to do this. Dad was making me, but the more I got to go down there and see with the cattle and, take an interest after my dad's lifelong investment. His dream was always to come back down here to Mexico one day when he'd retire and live the Mexican dream. Most of those who do migrate to the U.S. have that dream to come back and build something in their home country. Unfortunately for my dad, with his health, he wasn't able to. But he was building. He was building his ranch. He bought the properties that my grandfather had given in inheritance to each one of his kids. So my dad was buying those one by one from my uncles and aunt. And, he recovered almost everything my grandfather had at one point. And, that was his dream to come back down here. And when I come down here 2016, it started to become clear my dad wasn't going to be able to make it, because of his health. So those frequent trips turn into a little bit of a laboratory. Like, how am I going to learn? What do I need to learn? What's going on down here? Are the people taking care of my dad's cattle? Are they doing the right things? And my dad's had cousins, family members, strangers take care of his cattle, even, just trying to find somebody that could make it work for him, because it was a money pit. I mean, the last 20 years that he was investing here, I mean, he saw it as a hobby, and it was a money pit. And then when I came down here, wasn't much different. It's just, I had boots on the ground. So looking at that, there was a point where my mom and I had to sit down with my dad and said, we need to get rid of the cattle.
Really?
We need to get rid. This is a money pit. It's just not. And you should have seen the look on my dad's face. I mean, it was like we punched him in the gut. And so looking at that, and my dad with Parkinson's, his one thing that would get him excited when I was sending videos and pictures of his cows. So I said to my mom off to the side later, I said, I can't do this. I have to give it a shot. I don't know what we got to do, but I got to give it a shot and see if, I could, make this work, carry on some of my dad's legacy. And so that's where I started to say, okay, I guess I'm going to be a pastor, in the church, and a rancher, out on the field too.
Yeah.
And boy, that started the journey. That's about 6-7 years ago. Yeah.
That's really cool. Well,
It's a long intro. Sorry, Patrick.
no, that's exactly what I wanted. I mean, you and I had a 10-minute conversation 2 weeks ago when we lined out doing this thing. So as much as the listeners getting your story, so am I.
Oh,
And
cool.
and this is all part of the journey. I mean, you're in this world. How big is your YouTube channel there in Mexico?
Well, we're coming up to 20,000 subscribers. Facebook is our a big market too. We have about 70,000 followers on Facebook, and for a Spanish Mexican based you know content creator, that's getting in there, big numbers.
That's big anywhere in the world, Bubba.
Well, I had to do that, and I'll get to how I started, because when I didn't know what to do, Patrick, good old California boy said I can Google it.
Absolutely.
Google knows what to do. So, started Googling, watching YouTube videos, and, one thing after another, I found myself on that rabbit trail of regenerative ranching, and all those guys out there, that are putting their information out there and just showing what they're doing.
Yes, sir.
Jaime Elizondo, Joanne Zietzman, Greg Judy. I mean, love his red cattle, man. It's why I got red cattle today. So, I started down that rabbit trail, just learning and watching these conferences have been recorded. And that's where my journey started, where I started to say, Dad, maybe we can make this work, but we got to change everything. And, people always talk about that paradigm shift. I didn't have a paradigm. I didn't have a way of doing things. I didn't know how to do anything. And so if I'd sit and talk to the neighbors, I would have probably adapted their paradigm and their traditions. But it was easier to get on YouTube and Google these things. And so I started to look around here in Mexico, and there are people doing regenerative ranching, mostly up in the north, Chihuahua, Sonora, those upper north. They're right neighbors, in the backyard of the U.S. So that's usually where those new ideas from the US trickle in first. So there's a lot of guys practicing that used to do holistic, with the electric fence, and kind of like a trying to think of it, what they call it, the
Rotational
spokes.
grazing and
Yeah, using like the wheelhouse or spokes, whatever they call it.
yes, sir, the
There,
wagon
so
wheel.
they would wagon wheel. There you go.
Hey, man, you're catching me in month 3 of my YouTube education. Okay.
You got it. You got it. So, a lot of those guys started those practices 30 years ago and saw significant change. And I want to say 10 years ago or so, I heard 10, 12 years ago, Jaime Elizondo, or Jim Elizondo, and Joel Zietzman came down here. And I think some of the guys, trying to think who else was in those regenerative agriculture guys had came and made a visit down to Mexico with these guys that were doing holistic, and they started implementing adaptive grazing, more high density grazing, um, total grazing, as Jim Elizondo calls it. And so that's when they start to see the soil health take off, and the plants, even in the Chihuahuan desert, they've seen um, just the regeneration start to take off. And so it started a movement down here. So when I started going from the YouTube channel, just from a distance to find out there's people in our area, well, in the country, I started to implement. So we've been 5 years now implementing regenerative ranching methods, high density grazing, using the electric fence, moving anytime from 1 to 4 times a day, and it's typically 4 times a day. But we use that as a tool for different types of times of the year. And so, I started that 5 years ago. Of course, all the neighbors telling me how crazy I am, telling my ranch hand behind my back, hey, your boss is crazy. He better be making you rich for what he's having you do.
Yeah.
And my game changer is when I took the course with Jim Elizondo, Real Wealth Ranching. And it's, full online course. I think I took that in 2021.
Yeah.
And so I took that myself, and I paid as soon as he had available in Spanish. I paid for my ranch hand to take it too. And we were both on the same page. And we're like, close our ears to what the neighbors are saying. This is going to work, through the courses. Because one thing is like watching all these conferences that you didn't get to attend, and these, short interviews that you see. The other thing is taking an actual course that methodically is taking you pillar through pillar, step by step, when it comes to the genetics, the nutrition, the practical method of implying. And so that course really helped us like get a bird's eye view of the whole thing, and then start to implement it here. My ranch hand has been my co-laborer in this. I mean, without him getting it as well, it wouldn't have worked, because he said he threw in the towel the first few times, just didn't have the guts to call me and tell me. But he had thrown in the towel. He was like, "This guy's crazy. My neighbors are right. I ain't gonna do this." And I would come and say, "Where's the electric fence? Let's put it up again. Let's do it." And he just didn't have the guts to tell me he wanted to quit. But so when he took the course, it changed for him. We started implementing. I found out quickly my genetics, just like Jim Elizondo talked about, needed to change. And so that's where I took the delve into genetics. So you just stop me when you want to camp on something.
No,
Um,
this is great, man. I'm scratching on a notebook right now, and as soon as you take a breath, I'm going to just start throwing questions at you.
well, you got to remember, I'm a preacher, so I take very short pauses. So
Oh, that's a very good point. I didn't think about that.
you gotta stop me if we want to have a
Okay, well
dialogue
then
instead
let
of
me
a
just direct
monologue.
you. Then let me direct you. I would
Okay,
like to hear about
great.
your early days down there. So you just got down there. What were the genetics you were dealing with? Were they local? Were they American genetics that had been brought in place?
So my dad over the years had different. I'm trying to think the word moda in the Spanish and translate English to fads. There we go. So there's different fads. Here in Mexico, in this region, the charolais was that French breed. It's still today very popular. It's a
Charlet?
terminal breed. Charlet, there you go.
Yes, sir.
So it's a terminal breed, big, heavy bulls, big, heavy cows. And so his first genetics was that. And of course, we're in the semi desert here, semi arid area. Elevation is 2,000 meters, is about close to 7,000 feet above sea level. And we get a rainy season of about 3 months, monsoon season from July to September, maybe. And then the rest of the year, as soon as it gets cold, I mean, it's from November until raising season again, it's all yellow, it's all dry.
Really?
And so these big cows looked beautiful during the rainy season. And then come January, come the cold, come the dry grass, I mean, then you would feel sad. I mean, you'd make everybody feel envious during the rain, and then people would pity you during the summer because my dad had to bring them into corral, and they were in corral from March until the rain season. So
They
you're
just
looking
didn't
at,
hold condition, huh?
they wouldn't hold condition. They'd calve every other year, maybe. If they were lucky, they calved in the rain and they would breed back, sooner than others, and you'd get a 15-month interval. But it was all, again, my dad was propping them up, sending money from the U.S., buying in hay all the time.
Just supplying crutch after crutch.
Yeah, small winding weights, and he thought his solution was going to go to Simmental, because those are another continental breed, big as well, but they're supposed to be um, double purpose, dual purpose of milking, and everybody thinks if they're heavy milkers, you're going to get a heavier weaned calf,
Yeah.
but then you have that high maintenance year round, and so again, it was a change because of the fat. It came in here through Mexico, the South African genetics of Simmental, and then the Fleck V because they were supposed to be more milk, and so there was that direction we were going in. And so when I get here, that's the genetics we had. And so the first um, times implementing insemination was with the same breeds we were working with. Okay, well, but the best Simmental bull I can find on the market here, conventional, and that's got to change things. And of course, you get bigger calves, but then you have to prop them up.
Yeah.
And and so then the California boy in me said, the best steak I've ever had has been in Angus. So let me start exploring Angus. And so I got into Angus, conventional though, by all means, the show um, genetics. And so I implemented a little bit of that. Took me to buy a show pony, one of those nice looking shiny bulls that was creep fed since he was born, fed grain since he was 5 months, and he was beautiful. He walked around, you can walk him around like a dog, you
Yeah.
know, just the most docile thing ready. But that was in 2020, and there was no show. So I got a good deal on him. You had the breeder who was breeding them for show, and there was no shows during COVID. So I got a good deal on him, brought him to my ranch, and he melted. Just fell apart the first couple months here. As soon as we took those props away, those crutches, he started to melt. And so there I was, just all these initial ideas that I had of fixing the genetics we had using the same type of genetics. That's what
You realize you can't eat that halter.
I can't. No, I can't eat the whole thing.
Yeah, man.
So
Well, I think it's funny, not to break your train of thinking, but it sounds like for all the pushback you got about starting a new trend with your regenerative work there with the neighbors and they're talking to your ranch hand, those people fall victim to trends themselves fairly easily.
yeah. Well, these genetics I'm talking about, those are early days when I was just visiting the ranch. I hadn't yet taken ownership, the responsibility of it. I was still doing what my dad wanted to do. I hadn't gotten into regenerative yet. I
Okay.
found out once I started regenerative that those calves that were born from those Simmental that we had inseminated with Fleck V Austrian genetics and the show Angus that I had brought, his daughters never bred. Um,
So
because I started.
you didn't attempt to move these conventional genetics. You didn't try and ever adapt them over to a regenerative system. You already witnessed them fall apart. So when you started regenerative after that, did you move forward with a different set of genetics?
Well, I did try to get them to adapt to the regenerative.
Okay.
So like the first couple of years when I was trying to just better the genetics and keep doing things conventionally. And 2021 is when I took the class with Jim Elizondo, and I want to say it was later in the year in 2021. And I had already bought some Angus cows. I bought 10 registered Angus cows. They were also conventional genetics, but I figured they're smaller than the Charolais and they're smaller than the Simmental, so they should work. So I tried it. I had my mixture of Angus and Simmental and Charolais, and started my electric fence with those cows. Um, And first they didn't like it. Obviously they're used to being free. And then so when we got them on the pattern of respecting the electrical fence and moving at least once a day,
I like the way you put
but the
that,
more
respecting it.
yeah, respecting it, because I mean they never got to the point where they feared it, but they at least respected it.
Yes, sir.
And if they got a hint that it was not on, they were out free.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I
So
sidetracked you.
no, it's okay. It's okay. You, like I said, interrupt me because I'll just keep running. So we try to implement, and I'm talking about tried like a year. I had those genetics in regenerative ranching, and I could tell first because I did it all at the same time, and nobody tells you this when you're first starting. Um, if you don't want to lose your pants, you have to either go slow go or
All
cut
in.
and break or all in, right? So I
Yep.
did try to implement it all, but when I was implementing the regenerative ranching methods without having the proper genetics, that's where I fell apart. So then I try to implement the right genetics as I was going, and so then I'd start to see, okay, these cows are performing better than those cows with just looking at the body condition. Then when I started to close my calving window, because we had a year-round um, calving here, that's just the way everybody does it here. So when I took out the bull and decided to only have, first I did a 5-month calving window, and I had to forgive some cows because they had just calved before the calving window and weren't, or towards the end or whatever. So I had to forgive a few cows in the beginning, but then I was doing it all at the same time. I was implementing a calving season. I was implementing the regenerative ranching, the high density grazing, and so within the first 2 years, I didn't have the same cow herd. I had one cow that stuck around. Uh, this neighbor's beefmaster bull jumped the fence and got one of the Simmental cows, and so we had a half Simmental, half beefmaster. And I think it was because the hybrid vigor that she lasted so long as she did.
Yeah.
She ended up being sold as a 14-year-old. And when I started, implementing this, she was already, 8 years old, and she was on, clapping like cockwork within the season. She just missed last year as a 14.
Found a diamond in the rough, huh?
Yeah, and she was a tall cow, but there's somebody says it only takes one cow to make you a liar, right? You're talking about the moderate size, and you need this, and then you have one cow that just proves you wrong, and you're like, well, generally speaking, you need these type of genetics.
Yeah.
So as of doing these changes, I ended up bringing in some small frame 2, frame 3 Angus genetics with Faro Cattle Company influence. They're already here in Mexico. There's a Faro Cattle representative in Chihuahua, and so I was able to get some registered Angus from him. And once I started implementing them, I started saying, okay, those are going to be the ones that determine what the other cows do. If they're not able to make it, then I guess I'll just stick with these small ones. So eventually, I got down to just registered Angus with the Faro influence. Even those first 10 Angus that I bought that were conventional, they didn't make it, but one breeding season or two.
Well, Jesse, I've got to ask, at what point do you feel like other ranchers started to take notice of these positive changes you were witnessing? Was there a turning point you feel like, or was it just slowly they started getting a little bit of news out of your ranch hand and hearing about your calving intervals being better than the average for local, or was there one moment or many that helped move anybody in the right direction?
Well, in the third year in, we started to see the results in the field, right? Because right away when you start to implement the high density grazing, you have more grass available. You get longer times in each field and stuff. So that we knew from day one that we could see those benefits. But when we started seeing more plant density, when we started to see more leaf to stem ratio, when we had green regrowth in April before there's even a drop of water, we're getting green regrowth coming up just because we have the ground covered, and there's the organic matter from all the grass that was stepped on the year before. When we see that, then the ranch had started taking neighbors to go see, and you start walking on the grass, and you start to feel like you're walking on carpet, and you start to
Far denser.
yeah. And here we don't have big extensions. Our biggest field is 30 hectares, and so they're all divided. So we have maybe 9 different parcels in different areas, and they'd say, oh well, this area got more rain because this last year it rained more up here. Oh well, we take them down there where supposedly it didn't rain as much. And one of the fields, 10 hectares that we're managing, and they ran out of excuses and started asking more questions. And somewhere along the line, I started making longer videos for my dad, and my wife tells me, well, you're trying to send these videos on WhatsApp, and they have like limits for time and the megabytes that you could send. She goes, just upload it to YouTube. You're already making the videos for your dad, put it on YouTube, and then all your family can see it, and it doesn't cost you anything. And I go, well, if I'm going to do it for YouTube, what if other people see it? Well, then make it for other people to see it. So that's where I got the idea of, okay, maybe I'll do YouTube channel, and
That's great that happened organically like that.
yeah, I try to convince my ranch hand to be the one to do it because he's got better Spanish than me. But I had no takers on it, so I ended up doing it. In the beginning, they make fun of my accent, and then of course they start to see the results. They start to see the cattle, how it's looking, and then they ignore my accent and start paying attention to what we're doing. And still, swimming against the current. You have haters online that tell you you're selling smoke or something like that, and
You're always going to.
one thing is they can go back to my videos even 2 years ago and see the difference. When we're going into a certain field where we're going to graze, they could see the difference.
Well, Jesse, one commonality I haven't learned on that, encountering these haters to this message that we're all trying to push forward about these greater genetics and these practices that you can work in part with the land. We're the only ones admitting that we're ever learning. The folks that are ready to sit there and thumb their nose at you, they're set in their ways. There's nothing new to learn under this sun.
Yeah, that's right.
You and I are ready to roll with the punches.
Yeah, there's the problem is that you have to admit you could still learn something when you want to learn something.
That's right.
You have some of these guys who their dads are cattle ranchers and all their lives, and they since they were a kid they're going out the field with their dads. So what are they going to learn? They've been doing it, nothing's changed.
Well, they act like to question is to besmirch the honor of whatever the generation before built. And in my opinion, learning more and adapting to a new situation and a new reality, I'd rather carry the family legacy forward than be stuck in the past and be left behind.
Yeah. Well, and Patrick, there's also a certain way of wording things. Because if I word things in a way that makes it sound like my grandfather, my dad didn't know what they were doing, I'm saying the same thing about everybody else's dad and grandfather. But
Yeah.
what I always said, they were ranching under different circumstances, different costs. Was it just a different time?
Yeah, well, and it's funny how so many of them were so close to the truth, but they had academics turning them the other direction. They had the feed producer turning them the other direction, even though they were noticing these acts of commonality among herds and among regions and how their relationship with the earth. But oh no, it was just a heavier rain season. It wasn't the fact that you had less exposure to cattle. It wasn't the fact that we had a shorter grazing window. It was a heavy rain kept you off of it, and it was this and that. It was no benefit on your relationship with the land. It was just nature that season.
Yeah. Well, back when my grandfather was ranching here, there weren't fences up. There were, shared pastures, and everybody was allowed to have a certain number of cattle, depend on their rights or, uh, um, yeah, their land rights that they had. They could have certain number of cattle, and they were all those. I guess you'd call them Koreani cattle now, but they were adapted.
Oh yeah.
And then you had a certain point where the government here was saying we got programs to better your genetics, and we're bringing in genetics from the U.S. and they were giving support, supplement for the purchase of one of these bulls that came from American genetics and stuff like that. So you had my dad, you had my grandpa saying, oh well, here the government's recommending these breeds of bulls here. Um, that weren't going to fit our climate, that still, people are making it, they're trying to force it, but they're still not fitting our climate out here. They have to be propped up.
No, and you still have universities and breed association pushing the same failed genetics to this day.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say this before, somebody uh, else listening to this becomes a hater. It's not about the breed necessarily. Each
Oh
breed
no.
is going to be for its own area, right? Its own environment. But I'm talking about we're right here. We're in the semi-desert of central Mexico, and we just can't bring these breeds.
We're speaking more along the concept of local adaptation.
Yeah. And so back when my grandfather was ranching, they didn't have the problems with the fences. The plow was barely being introduced down here. But the cattle was allowed to graze and to fend for themselves, and they would herd together. People would keep their herds together. But now with fences up and paddocks from 5 hectares to 50 hectares, I mean, then people set stock, and you have the problems with the desertification and overstocking and all that stuff. So we've changed the look of the pastures here in Mexico because of it, because of mismanagement, right? So when
Yeah.
Grandpa started plowing, he didn't know what he was doing to the soil. He didn't know, and when people first started plowing, and when I say plow, I'm talking about with machinery, with the John Deere tractor, with the um, with that type, because my grandpa used to plow with donkeys. I don't think it had the same effect, adverse effects that it did when they started using the deers instead of the donkeys.
Yeah, it was better when we were less efficient.
Yeah.
Well, Jesse, if you don't mind, I would like to kind of jog back. You touched on something really well there. The fact that you have to adopt the proper way of speaking or language to straddle the emotional nuance of it crossing the line of being informative versus insulting to heritage.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could speak a little further on what you feel the process of waking people up to this relatively new way of ranching is. Are you being met with a lot of pushback? I know we spoke on the haters, but I would like to kind of dive into, has there been positive? Is it well met?
Well, I think because of the success of our YouTube channel and our Facebook followers, we're seeing that, yeah, there are people that are waking up to the reality that um, we can't keep doing the things the way they've been done in the past and expect to have change in the future. There's obviously changes um, in the climate. It's raining less. Um, the fields aren't yielding what they used to. I mean, those things, you don't have to be a rocket science to notice that it's not raining like it used to, right?
Well, and Jesse, you don't even have to be a full believer. You can not believe climate change all you want, but you can also take on Pavlov's wager to, what's the worst thing that can happen should you feed into this ideology that it is happening and it is real? The
Mm-hmm.
worst thing that can happen is you come out with a greener planet. You come out with better pastures. You raise fatter cattle.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Well,
I,
then,
I mean, that's the worst that happens, brother.
yeah, no, and the whole thing about the climate change, it's been weaponized to do a lot of crazy things with government overreach and stuff like that. But it's obvious it's not raining as much as it used to. The rains are coming later on in the year than it used to. You know, the climate change, a lot of people have different ideas about it, but the truth is, well, we could just look at the record and it's just not raining as much as it used to.
Yeah.
Other
So
areas are getting floods where it used to not flood. So there's obviously changes going around, you know, whether side of the political aisle you're on, you know, how it's been used uh, to weaponize we can't just flat out deny it.
yeah. So would you say that these weather changes are helping drive people to your message as well?
You know, they're having that need. The need is driving them to look. It's like when I had that need to try to make the ranch work for my dad's well-being, you know, for his mental health, for his you know, just for my dad to enjoy his last years of life with satisfaction, that the years that he was investing here hasn't gone to waste, you know, and what he was building up as an inheritance for the future generation is being taken advantage of. I have four sisters and I'm the only boy, so it was kind of left to me to either do something or watch.
If it's meant to be, it's up to me.
Yeah, yeah. So there has been that need that drives people to look for solutions, right? And so I just want to be a solution out there where people can listen to and hear and just give information the way I was able to find information when I looked for it online.
Would you say that's the goal of your presence online?
Yes. Yeah. Because I
Okay.
can't sell my cattle all over. You know, I don't have enough cattle to meet the demand that we're getting from the channel. So
Yeah.
more of that I've had to take. Okay, this isn't going to be just marketing of cattle. This is going to be information like I was able to find. It's my way of giving back. You know, because somebody put information out there that I was able to learn from.
All right. Well, I feel like I would be at a miss if I didn't ask here. Is that what helped lead you to a relationship with Boss Sires? We do need to acknowledge the fact that you are the Boss Sires representative for Boss Sires representative for Mexico.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but in the whole circle, you're always searching for like-minded people. You know,
Absolutely. Yes,
people
sir.
that you can work with, and so you know, as you start to make connections, who's doing what, and who's bringing in, you know, live animals. And I connected with Enrique Guerrero, who's bringing in live animals to Mexico. Brought a lot of Mashona down here last year. You know, I was talking about, you know, I have different customers that call and say, hey, I'm looking for Brahmin, or I'm looking for this type of cattle, I'm looking for that type of cattle. And rather just say, nope, just got red Angus and black Angus. That's all I got. You know, I mean, I wanted to make some connections. Um,
Absolutely.
to be honest with you, I didn't expect to find a Brahmin breeder, or Bos Indicus breeders that are following the breeding principles that you know, that fertility. They're putting fertility um, before growth and performance. That are actually looking for grass based genetics. So when Enrique told me about Grant and his project with Boss Sires, you know, at first I was a little skeptical. Like, really? Like, you know, fertile Brahmin genetics? I mean, Grant might get mad at me for saying that, but it's not the thing here. Every Brahmin breeder here will admit in Mexico, the genetics they've been using, they're not getting a calf on the ground until the cow's at least 3 years old. And if the cow's 3 years old, giving your first calf, they're jumping for joy. But there's some cows that not giving their first calf till they're 5. It's because they've been selecting for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Well, not to derail you, but we actually just got a video very proudly shared with Callion Farms, a
Yeah.
one breeding group and Boss Sires Network, and a some of their genetics over there in the Philippines, all the way across the world. Female had her first calf on the ground at 27 months old.
Awesome.
They're told that 3 years, almost 3 years, is the norm, and they're fine with 2 to 3 year windows in between calving intervals.
That's the other thing. Not only just when it first breeds, but how often.
Exactly. So you've highlighted that exactly very well there, Jesse. The fact that the world can wake up to the idea that fertility has been an issue for a long time and
Yeah.
is highly heritable.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I feel like on my channel, I'm always talking about the basics, which is, a correct cattle breeding season, short and correct to calve with nature, to know at least records on your cattle. When's the last time she bred, right? Because most people are hobby farmers and it's just like a side gig or, something they inherited from their parents, and they're not doing it for any, source of wealth. A lot of people here are wealthy and want to show their wealth by the type of cattle that they're breeding, but like the basics, of what's your inner calving period look like, you know, and just some of those basics, even just talking about that gets people ruffled up, because it's like they know they got to do it, but they don't want to do it because they know if they look into the numbers, they're not going to be as favorable. And so they'd rather be blinded and think that they're doing okay. So those are the people that I get the kickback from. But people who are going to be honest and say, yeah, I think I can get better. Let me learn how. Those are the ones that'll find themselves on my channel. They'll find themselves interacting, commenting, and looking for solutions. And Boss Sires is going to be a solution in the area of genetics, because a lot of genetics are bred for the show. They're bred for the blue ribbons, and it's just not practical all the time. And we don't want to have that divide between what's practical for the field, for the pastures, and what's beautiful for the show.
Yeah, my interview with PJ Butler, he highlighted that the show world genetics, they're all but divorced from reality.
Yeah.
The needs, the requirements, and the functionality that is needed is not present anymore, and they're all but proud of that.
Yeah.
You highlighted something there that in many parts of the world, cattle have become a sign of wealth, and it's almost like the more inefficient they are, the greater flash that they are, and a greater show of wealth.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, what is the biggest way to show your wealth? Bring something that is completely unregionally adapted into your area. It is the
Yeah.
biggest flex for some of these people. The fact that, I mean, the guy who brought in another dog off the street ain't nothing. The guy that has a snow leopard in his backyard in Chihuahua, Mexico, has some flash, okay? Because
Yeah.
he had to provide the AC, the chilled meat, the everything. It's just a
Yeah.
sign of wealth.
Yeah, I went to a farm one time. It was full of peacocks, and I'm thinking, what is the peacock here? But just the total image of what the owner's trying to do here.
That was a very poor analogy on my part. Well, Jesse, I was wondering, I know that I spoke on it quite a few times with different people that have been guests on the podcast about food security and how a good mission of Boss Hires is to have a desire to feed the world. And we feel that profitable and functional cattle are a great way to establish some level of food security. I was wondering if you feel like y'all struggle with that there, and if you feel like your message could deliver some hope on that subject.
Yeah. You know what? But before I touch on that part, I do want to say that the genetics in the U.S. is very influential over Mexico because of Mexico exporting meat into the U.S. Right? So
Yes, sir.
we got to use those show genetics because that's what they want to see in the feedlots. That's what they want to buy. They want those big carcass trait animals and stuff. So the U.S. genetics is heavily influencing Mexico's genetics. So that's
Yes.
taking us to a place where we now need more hectares per animal. So in my area, they suggest 6 hectares per animal unit, which is a 450 kilo cow, which is I think 1,100 pound cow, to do the math in pounds instead of kilos. So
Well, for the listener, an hectare is 2.4 acres.
yes, yes.
2.47.
So we're needing 6 hectares for one animal unit, but that's doing the math on an 1,100 pound cow. So you bring in genetics that's going to leave you with, I don't know, 1,600, 1,800 pound cow. I mean, those cows, they're going to be tall and lanky, but they're not going to be full, not in our environment. And so then you have to adapt. You have to change your numbers. You can't keep running the 6 hectares per one cow. Now you need 10, maybe 12, because you're running a bigger animal. And so you're not able to have the same carrying capacity. So you're producing less animals per hectare, less kilos, less pounds per acre, right? And so now we have less animals. Right now, just as in the U.S., I think the U.S. Cattle herd is at an all-time low. Mexico too. We had a real bad drought 2 years ago. So right now you just can't replace the females fast enough. So that's lowered the amount of animals that we're exporting, because they're almost doing, particularly males, and the females that are leaving, they have to castrate them to go. Um, and there's such a demand for meat in the U.S. and for that type of genetics. And I think American ranchers are not aware how much meat is coming in from Mexico, from Australia. Not too long ago, I was looking through feeds because they had to shut down the border because of this tapeworm or something down here in Mexico that came in through Central
Screwworm.
America. Screwworm, there you go. So the screwworm came in through illegally crossed animal from Central America into Mexico. And so it was spotted around here. And so they're doing everything they can to get it under control before it starts to spread, because this is something that already been eradicated, right? So
Yep.
I've watched a few feed on Facebook, and it was just baffling to me how people are commenting, about the Mexican meat. Uh, and there's almost no difference in the genetics, right? And people are just like, oh, we don't need that Mexican meat trash up here. Well, the genetics down here is almost a mirror to what's being made in the U.S. And so the U.S. is not producing enough meat, and most people don't know that. And if it was strictly U.S. meat, you guys would be paying incredibly more than what you're paying right now for your meat, right? I don't want to get in controversial, but the U.S. needs to import meat.
Absolutely. Well, the majority of countries do, and people just don't realize how much American genetics have influenced the remainder of the world. So they can
Uh,
say, "Oh, they can keep all that trash beef." You're probably the same herd that's in South Florida is probably being found right there in Mexico at this point in
yeah,
time.
it's the same genetics. It's
It's
the
all
same
the
genetics.
same, and it's that's the point that that's the whole reason we're here talking today is we're trying to say that locally adapted genetics are less susceptible to all these things, and that
Yeah,
you'll find greater quality, greater growth, and a greater impact on your environment if you can adapt your system to locally adapted genetics.
yeah, yeah. So when it comes to feeding, our environment, our region, a lot of the meat from Mexico is going up to the U.S. And so Mexico's finding themselves having to input meat in the form of sheep. So Mexico's bringing a lot of sheep from Australia to meet their meat demand, because Mexicans eat a lot more sheep than beef, believe it or not. And pork, crazy amount of pork. So there's pork getting input into Mexico too. There's a lot of production on chicken here. It's one of the cheapest things that you could produce, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
beef is a luxury for a lot of people. And in the bigger cities, you do have those nice, good American cuts, with the ribeyes and the T-bones and all those good cuts. But most regional parts of Mexico, people aren't looking for the marbling. People aren't looking for the fat and the steaks. And so it's a different quality of meat that's going imported into the U.S. from Mexico, because the high standards of the American buyer. So we're seeing that there's certain type of animal that it's going to stay in Mexico, and this is what the Mexican market's looking for. And there's type of animal that it's just going to be more profitable to export it into the U.S. to meet that demand that the U.S. has. They love their burgers, they love their ribeyes. So I mean, that's what I was raised on up there in California. So uh,
Yeah.
got to tell my buddies in California and Texas and all the cowboys up there that want the good old USA meat. If you stick to only US meat, you can pay $20 a pound or whatever. I don't know where it's at right now, but just
Yeah.
imagine paying so much more.
Well, Jesse, if you're comfortable with it, I would like to shift to speaking about the potential of you building some Boss Hire Spanish only content.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know, I know we're super excited about it. So I was really wanting to just turn you loose and letting you go and tell us what you hope to create and what message you really hope to deliver about Boss Sires to Spanish only speakers.
Yeah. So my content right now is mainly on my ranch, daily activities, cattle moves, showing what we're doing with the regenerative ranching, and occasionally, if I'll deliver some cows or deliver bull, with my customers, I'll do interview how they found out about us, and with them, I'm able to stay on the same notes about the type of cattle that we're looking for. But every once in a while I'll go to a state fair and I'll interview these conventional cattle breeders, and I don't have no problem because there's a market for everybody. The sun shines for everybody, right? So I'll interview
Yes,
some
sir.
of these guys, and I'm not baiting them. I'll just ask them, what was the process. Charlet, calf, was it born unassisted, and what how you raising them in the field, if they have creep feeding or if they're just natural or grass fed or what kind of assistance. So I'll do those questions that I'm finding out most everybody that's, raising their animals conventional, um, they have those high inputs. And so I'm finding
Mm-hmm.
out that that's most of the genetics that are raised here in Mexico are being raised with high inputs. And the majority of cattle ranchers here in Mexico, they're small farmers. They're 20 cows or less, and they're looking to these guys who are raising cows and are totally supporting and supplementing everything that they need to get those cows done. And so the genetics that we need to run a low input cattle farm, they're just not out there. And so what I hope to do with my channel from here now, with partnership and as a representative of Boss Sires, is reach out to those breeders who are looking to go against the flow. There are, like I said, there's some in Mexico that have been doing things for the last 30 years holistically, selecting the right genetics. And so what we want to do is highlight those farms and their genetics. Their genetics will never be in a catalog from any of this, big genetic companies. And so that's what I want to do with my channel, is go out there, visit them, tell their story, talk about their genetics. And I have a cow on my farm that's 5 years old that's given 4 calves. And when I say that, people say, "What, was she born pregnant?" And they'll just, they'll harp on me, hate on me. But I'll say, "Hey, do the math. She calved at 2. That was her first calf. She calved again at 3. That was her second. She calved at 4. That's her third. She calved her fourth one at 5 years old, buddy. Do the math." And people are like, "That's impossible." And I'm saying it's not only possible, it's more common than you think if you select for the right reasons. So, I just want to get the story out that there are good genetics, still being bred in the U.S., in Mexico, in Costa Rica. There's countries in Latin America that are doing things old school, and this is where we got to nod our hats to Grandpa and Dad that did go against the flow. There were a few of them that didn't cave in to the trends in the cattle market and kept doing things like, if the cow gets pregnant, she stays. If she doesn't, she goes. And so there
Yeah.
are legacy breeders out there. We want to tell their story and want to make their genetics available. Because like Grant says, these big genetic companies aren't going to highlight genetics for fertility because, number one, they're in the ignorance thinking that it's not heritable. And number two, they don't win any ribbons.
And they can't profit from that.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's really great, and I'm super excited about that. Jesse, I did misspeak earlier. You're not a rep. You're a distributor.
Yes.
You should
Yeah.
have corrected me.
Well, I don't know the difference between rep and distributor because I'm definitely going to be representing.
Absolutely.
But distributor is going to take me that extra step, and that, you want to get the genetics. We'll do the logistics to get it down here. And then
Yeah.
also the genetics that's already available in Mexico. Highlight those breeders that are here in Mexico. There's few and they're far between. But I think that with these day and age that we have of social media, we can definitely make it known a lot easier than we could have 30 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's probably one of the more beautiful parts about this whole organization is the fact that I'm not telling you to buy locally adapted and then only advertising something from the other side of the world. we're actively seeking things that represent the same way of management, and we want them to be as close to your backyard as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many countries involved. We got Australia, Canada, Colombia, Mexico, US, and, there's the breeders all over.
Yes, sir. Well, Jesse, so you said you've listened to at least one of my podcasts, right?
I've listened a couple, yeah.
Okay, well, then you've heard the greater question I ask everybody.
You have to remind me.
Okay. In your opinion, what is the moral obligation of the cattlemen to the land, the industry, and future generations?
What is the moral obligation? My goodness. Well, I mean, got to ranch with purpose, right?
That's right.
And breed for the future.
Yes, sir.
That big why as to why we're doing this. Ranch with the purpose, man. And we get fired up about our purpose. And then definitely breed for the future, that we have the next generation that's going to be also stewarding the land and stewarding the genetics. And, we got to see everything as what God put in our hands to steward as a responsibility. And so there we go. That's the moral obligation of the ranchers and breeders.
Well, Jesse, if there was one message you'd like for the listener to walk away from our interview today, what would you hope that they gain?
Boy, that everybody just keeps a mentality of learning. Be learners all the time.
Yes, sir.
It takes a little humility. There's a lot of good information out there. You got to sift through it, but and with that, when you have that purpose in mind, that you're doing this in order to be able to give something worth giving to the next generation.
Yes, sir. Well, Jesse, we're getting to the end of this, so I just want to point out that we will be linking your YouTube channel in the description of this podcast. That way people can see some real ranchers in action. And everybody needs to keep a lookout for the launch of our Boss Sires en Español.
Yeah.
If you're in Mexico and want some help, you should really reach out to Jesse or check out his page on our distributor page, a portion of our website. Thank you again for coming on today, Jesse.
I appreciate it, Patrick. I know we talked about a bunch of different things, and I didn't let you talk very much, but I do appreciate it.
This worked out just the way I wanted, Bubba. I love when the guests can dominate. They're not here to hear me. They're here to hear you.
Hopefully it's been useful to someone, and I do enjoy talking about ranching and genetics, and hope somebody got something from it.
Yes, sir. Well, I hope to have you back on in the future. But that's all for today's episode of Sustainable Stock. That's a big thanks to Jesse Colón for sharing his story and for reminding us what it looks like to build something real, even when the odds aren't in your favor. If this episode hit home, pass it on. And if you're still propping up cattle that can't hold condition without help, it might be time to rethink what you're selecting for. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to
ranch with purpose and breed for the future.
Thank you for tuning in to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share. Join us next time as we continue exploring the legacy and future of cattle ranching. For more information, visit us at bosssires.com. That's BOSSIRES.com. Or connect with us on Facebook. Until then, stay rooted in common sense and connected to the herd.